Well, folks, my name is Jerry Glenn. We've been here 30 years, but we were born and raised in the south side of Chicago. Moved 3 years, wonderful years, to Kansas City, then 18 years in New York City and Jersey, and then the last 30 years here. That makes me 85. So my wife is, I have a brand new wife. She's sitting over there, only 61 years, been married, and I've been a baseball fan since 1939. Before we get started, I want to tell you a story, absolutely unrelated to baseball, but relevant to tonight, this afternoon. I was a promotion manager for Nabisco, and I was working late one night getting ready for a convention, and I was walking out, and the chairman of the board says, "Jerry, what are you doing here so late?" I says, "Well, I'm working on the big meeting." He says, "Do you have your entertainment yet?" And I said, "No," but I says, "I'm working on it." He says, "Let's get somebody top drawer." I said, "Well, you know, that costs money." And he says, "I'll give you the budget." So next day, I had a good friend that was the listing agent for the Flyers Club. So I called him up and I told him my dilemma. He said, "Jerry, give me an hour." And so he called me back and he says, "I've got two greats for you and they're within your budget." I said, who do you have?" "I have Julie Budd, who was the protege of Barbara Streisand, and Milton Berle." I said, "Milton Berle?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "You know, he's 78, but he needs to work." And so I said, "Can you get him?" He says, "You tell me when you need him, what date, and I'll get back to you right away." And he did. And he said, "This guy is a professional. If you say 2:30 in Marco Island in the meeting room, he'll be there." And true enough, it came 2:30 on meeting day, and I look in the shadows, and coming out in this dark room, and my table was illuminated, I see this man walking like this with a trench coat and a scarf. And I thought, what did I get into? So he sits down, he says, "You're Jerry?" I said, "I'm Jerry." He said, "I'm your Uncle Milty." And he sat down and he says, "You know," he says, "I have to wear this coat and this scarf because this doggone air conditioning kills you." So this is Marco Island, Florida. So anyway, he says, "What's your plan?" I told him my plan. He says, "Terrible, terrible." He says, "You're the salesman, I'm the entertainer. Here's what we're gonna do. Halfway through Julie Budd, somebody escort me to this very seat." And he says, when she's finished, have your MC say, "Hey, we have another good friend here. We have Milton Berle," and everybody's gonna say, like you just did, "Yeah." So he says, "Have somebody escort me up to the stage." So that happens beautifully. So he walks up to the stage, he turns around, gets on the mic, and Milton was 39. And that's how I feel. I'm 85, and I feel 39 when it comes to baseball. So, how did I get involved? I don't know how my daddy did it, but he had front row seats to the Boston Red Sox White Sox doubleheader in 1940. And we were sitting right behind the batting circle, and who's in the batting circle but Ted Williams? Bobby Dorr was up to bat, and incidentally, folks, Bobby Dorr is 99 today. How about that? But anyway, I had my baseball hat on. Ted Williams, this is 1940, turns around, 41, excuse me, and he winks at me. That was it. I said to my dad, "I want to be a baseball player." So when I got to be 10 and 11, I thought, boy, this is what I really want to be. When I was a pretty good hitter. So at age 17, I was called to play for the semi-pro Fernwood Cubs. And the manager was a minor leaguer from the Cubs, and he had all last year's uniforms. So he hands me my uniform, I bring it home, I didn't look inside of it, and embroidered in the bottom, Andy Pathko. So I wore Andy Pathko's uniform to the first game. Now, here's where the bubbles burst. We play the first game, and the manager says, now we're up against it today because the pitcher against us was just dropped by the New York Giants last Saturday, and he's going to pitch against us. So I don't know any better. So I get up to bat. The first pitch is coming right at my head, and I ducked out of the way, and the umpire said strike. So I said, this is what's in the major leagues. I don't think I'm going to make it. What a difference. You know, in those days, there was only 400 players because there was 25 on a roster and there were only 16 teams. So if you were in the major leagues, you were really something special. You know, getting back to Ted Williams, this is the honest to God's truth. I dream Ted Williams is teaching me how to hit. And I've had it recently again, and every time I get up, I strike out. So, again, major leagues are really something. Now you're wondering why I picked 1940 through 1959. There were so many things happen that we all, by looking at the hairlines and the gray hair, I think they're going to relate to this. There were so many events that we still talk about. I met with a few of you out here, and you're all talking about the Brooklyn Dodgers. That was in the golden age. Incidentally, their picture up in the far corner is the very last picture taken of the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1957 before they moved. So anyway, I picked them because of the events. And the way we want to start out is right the first day in 1940. And in 1940, the opening day was the Cleveland Indians against the Chicago White Sox. And my friend, and I can say this dearly, Bob Feller was a good friend of Lori and myself. He pitched a no-hitter. And when we had dinner with him, when he was out to the shop, we had dinner with him, he said, that was no great feat. He said it was 40 degrees and nobody could hit. And that was so true. But Bob, Lou Perella, a local Islander, who maybe some of you know from Lewis Sterling Carpet, he was my partner, and we hosted Bob for a signing. 565 people came. The reason I know that, that's how many tickets we sold. So we took him to dinner that night, and we thought it would be an hour. After he signed 500 and some autographs, we had a 3-hour dinner. Bob did not want to shut up. He told us everything. And it was so interesting. And when you get inside of these major leagues' heads, it's really revealing. Believe it or not, my friend Ted Williams, who I also knew, we were one of his dealers, the Red Sox were losing 13-1 in September. The manager put Ted Williams in, he pitched 2 innings. And I don't think anybody knew that. He pitched 2 innings. He gave up 3 hits, but no runs. So he boasted, I had a 0 ERA as a pitcher. Now, 1941. 1941 came along, and you know what happened in 41. You had the 56-game hitting streak, and you had Ted Williams hitting 406. Excuse me. He hit 412 in today's standards, because in those days they didn't count sacrifice flies. He had 6 sacrifice flies, which would have elevated his batting average to 412. And very few people knew or know that. But 1941, the big item in 41 was the dropped 3rd strike. Mickey Owen dropped the third strike as the Brooklyn Dodgers were trying desperately to win a World Series. And the irony of this was Tommy Henrich was old reliable. He didn't strike out. He struck out. Hugh Casey was the best reliever in the league that year. He threw the pitch. Mickey Owen was the top fielding catcher, so they all failed. Well, on deathbed, Hugh Casey said, I ruined a man's life, Mickey Owen, because that ball was a wild pitch. It was not a passed ball. Well, the series was great. The scores, get this, 2-1, 3-2, 2-1, 3-1. And the game that the dropped third strike was 7-4, and the Yankees went on to win again from the Brooklyn Dodgers. Poor Mickey Owen was a GOAT for life. Okay, the series is over. Pearl Harbor. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to baseball? FDR, within 5 weeks, on January 15th, said baseball should continue. Why? Because we're all going to be against the war, and we're all going to be pitching in, and we need some relaxation. It was a great decision. Many went on to war, and now we have 1942. The World Series had a new rookie, Stan Musial. Johnny Beasley was their main pitcher. The Yanks won the opener big, but the Cardinals came back and swept the Yanks 4 games in a row. Now we hit 1944, oh boy. St. Louis Browns, the doormat of the league for years. They won the pennant the last day over Detroit by 1 game. The Cardinals won again by 14.5 games. The series was played in Sportsman's Park because they both were from St. Louis. A lot of people don't realize that St. Louis Browns owned the park. They were the owners of Sportsman's Park. Fabulous pitching World Series. Again, scores 2-1, 3-2, 2-0, 3-1, 6-2, and 5-1. And the Browns' ERA was far greater than the Cardinals, but the Cardinals won. Hal Newhouser won 29 games. He couldn't get in the service because of an ailment that he had. He won 29 games. The next year, he came back and won 25. He's the only pitcher ever to win 2 MVPs in a row. 1946. Does anybody remember the Mad Dash? The Mad Dash. What was that? We talk about exciting World Series, like the one we just had, which was really exciting. But how could you be more exciting than a 7th game, 3-3 in the 9th inning, 2 outs, Enos Slaughter on first base, who was originally chided for not hustling. He's on first base, and he said to himself, my golly, I've got to get in. 2 outs. Harry Walker hit a screaming single to center. Leon Culberson was the center fielder. He just replaced Dom DiMaggio because Dom wasn't feeling good. Culberson picks up the ball, throws it to Johnny Pesky, catches the ball perfect, and he hesitated 2 seconds. We always talk about baseball being a game of inches. Pesky threw to the plate. Slaughter never slowed down. He went from first all the way home. Safe, series over. Now, how's that for an ending? TV wasn't big then. We didn't really realize what was going on. So here we are, curse of the babe again. 47, we've all heard about it. In fact, I think there was a class a month ago on Jackie Robinson. We all know about Jackie Robinson. He's All-American at UCLA in everything. And there's a story that I just came across. When Jackie Robinson was signed to play, there was outrage everywhere. His first series was in Chicago, and the Cubs fans, but more importantly the Cubs players, were brutal. I mean, they did everything. So he survived that, he went to St. Louis. It was worse. I can't tell you, it's in the book, but I can't use the words. So then he went to Pittsburgh. When he got to Pittsburgh, not a peep came out of the opposing players. Why? Before the game, a great big first baseman stood up in front of the players and said, I hear one thing out of you, and I said, you're going to answer to me. That was Hank Greenberg. Hank Greenberg's only year with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He says, if anybody knows discrimination, I do. Hank Greenberg being Jewish, he knew what went through. So then when he went back to Brooklyn, things subsided. And you all know the story that Pee Wee Reese, a Southerner, befriended him, and it didn't take long. Jackie Robinson was a star within 2 years and made the All-Star game 6 years in a row. So he played for the Dodgers until the Dodgers wanted to trade him to the Giants. He says, oh my gosh, you're not trading me to the Giants, I'll retire. Oh, no, you wouldn't. He did. And he became president of Chock full of Nuts. This is when Yogi Berra came on the scene with the Yankees. And the manager really didn't want to use him as a catcher. He didn't have faith in him yet. So he put him out in the outfield. And that's where the saying comes, it gets late early out there. Because left field was a dark field and it was hard to field out there. But as you know, Yogi had a lot of great sayings, and we're going to talk about that a little later. 1948, Swan and Sane and Pray for Rain. I guess you all know what that was. They only had 2 pitchers and they were in the World Series, and the fans were saying, Swan and Sane. And if you look at the records, Sane pitched first game, Swan second. Then they put a guy named Boiselle in. He got bombed. Then it was Sane, and then it was Swan. So the saying was very true. 1951, DiMaggio slowing down. He hit 301, but he knew the end was near. So the next year he hit 263. Oh dear, what are the Yankees going to do? Here comes Mickey Mantle. So the succession was there. For 31 years, those 2 guys hit 897 home runs, 22 World Series, and 27 All-Star games. So the Yankees didn't suffer in center field. Now we come to 1951, another event, the shot heard around the world. So much has been written and discussed about the shot, but one of my customers came in from Indiana and he says, I'm a neighbor of Carl Erskine, and I think I have a story to tell you. I said, please. He says, I have lunch with Carl, and he tells me this all the time. He said it was the 9th inning, and Newcomb was tired, and they went to bring a pitcher in. So the manager calls out, who's ready? Well, he says, Erskine just threw one in the dirt. Send in Branca. As you all know, Branca hit, Thompson hit the home run. But what I didn't know was Branca gave up a home run to Thompson in the first game of the playoff. And that's ironic. And they brought him in. And Monty Irvin called me. He wanted to sell some baseball cards. And I said, Monty, I just learned that Branca gave up a home run in the first game. And he said, and so did I. It was so cute the way he said it. And he says, I went on to get 11 hits in the World Series. But he says, we lost. So, incidentally, Monty Irvin's brother lives in Colleton River, and he visits often. So here we go in 1951. That's another great event. 1953, the shifts began. And the shifts really worked out good. The Braves went to, from Boston to Milwaukee. They immediately went from 280,000 up to 1.8 million. And I can go right down the line. All the teams really improved. And some of the teams that moved didn't go into their present stadiums because they had to use, like the Coliseum and so forth and so on. So now 1956, here we go again. Yankees versus Dodgers, game 2. Dodgers swamped the Yankees 13-8. Why? They had a pitcher the Yankees put in by the name of Don Larson. He didn't last 2 innings, and they knocked him out. Fast forward 3 days later. What? Is Casey nuts? He's going to pitch Don Larson again. And you know the story. Don Larson pitched a perfect game. And it was so perfect that Yogi Berra said, I never saw anything like it. I put my glove there, he hit it every time. He was perfection. So here, a loser, a mediocre pitcher, the hero for the ages. Don Larson has made a living off that one game. Don Larson was not a good pitcher. He had a losing record. I think he won 80 and lost 95. But the 5th inning was the key. Mantle made a sensational catch to save the no-hitter. That was the only big hit of the series. I don't think I have time to get into a young 19-year-old basketball player from Cincinnati came along. His name was Sanford, and he had a very unremarkable record of 36 wins and 40 losses. But a scout and a pitching coach by the name of Joe Becker got a hold of Sandy Koufax and turned him around. They found a flaw. Sandy went on to win 129 games and only lose 47. He's not on my list because he did nothing in the 50s. He did it all in the 60s. So now, if I will, I want to just run down my 25 players that we all have some memory of, and some unusual things happen. Aaron, Appling, Banks, Berra, Bedreau, Clemente, DiMaggio, Feller, Ford, Fox, Kaline, Killebrew, Kiner, Mantle, Matthews, Mays, Musial, Newhouser, Satchel Paige, Rizzuto, Jackie Robinson, Snyder, Spawn, and Ted Williams. And right in the middle of that, the manager, the absolute manager of that era, was Casey Stengel. Casey Stengel was a genius. Everybody was making fun of Casey. Take it from Roger Craig, who used to visit our store. We talked often. Roger Craig said, you don't know how smart this man was. He was the guy that put in platooning. They hated it. It won. He's the guy that when the fans chided him, he doffed his cap and a bird flew out. And this was confirmed in the Stengel book. Anyway, Casey became the surrogate father of Mickey Mantle. There's a Dick Perez painting up there showing this. And the reason he did that, you all recall that in the World Series, Joe DiMaggio was the king in center field. Mickey was in right field. So when Joe went for a ball, you gave it to Joe. Mickey came over to catch it. He tripped over a sprinkler system and injured his leg. Went into the hospital. Coincidentally, his father was dying, and his father was in the next room. Casey came over to see him, and when Mantle passed away, Casey sort of took over Mickey Mantle and became his surrogate father. And so that was a big thing for Casey Stengel. Casey wanted to be a dentist, but he ended up in the big leagues. He was Charles Dillon Stengel. Where did Casey come from? He was born in Kansas City, and everybody, as a minor leaguer, they said, Casey, hey Casey. And so he signed his name Casey, C-A-S-E-Y. So he was Casey Stengel, and that's where the Casey came from. Stengelese, quickly, he responded to Kefauver on the free agency, and he gave a speech for 1 hour and said nothing. And Kefauver said, I don't think you understood the question. He says, you wouldn't have understood the answer. So anyway, they call on Mickey Mantle and says, Mr. Mantle, you heard what Mr. Stengel said. What do you think? I agree. so that was the beginning of Stengelese. And Stengelese went into yogiisms. So Casey inherited a team of McCarthy players. McCarthy did not believe in platooning. And Casey had a hard time with handling the players. They started out with 4 wins, and then they started losing. He called a meeting, and it was not reported. Grantland Rice said, I will not put this in the paper, but I want to be there. Casey came out of his office in shorts. He was a funny-looking guy anyway, but he came out only dressed in shorts, and he says, okay, you guys, here's the way it is. Henrik, you're supposed to be a good hitter. You're terrible. You lost the game today. But you're going to win games for me the rest of this season. He did this with 5 players, brought them to tears. They literally was crying. But when he walked out, they rallied behind him and they walked away with the pennant. And he gained their confidence by telling them what he thought, but what he expected. And it all came to be. It's one of the best speeches ever. They asked Casey when he retired, who are your best Yankees? There's a surprise, folks. DiMaggio, Berra, and Hank Bauer. Why not Mickey Mantle? Mickey Mantle never played to his full potential, as great as he was, because his legs. Roger Craig said, if you saw Mickey Mantle dressing in the room, you would cry. They were bleeding. He played, and he still could get down to first base in 4 seconds. Mickey Mantle was a marvel, could have ended up being the best player in history, but he was never 100% healthy. Quickly, Aaron, Dodgers turned him down, too skinny. He just went on to be the home run hitter. And think about this. He hit in unfriendly parks where Babe Ruth hit in Yankee Stadium with a friendly right field. So Hank Aaron really was the home run king. The jury is out on Bonds, but I think that Hank Aaron is the Luke Appling. My wife and I met with Luke Appling right after he hit the home run in the Cracker Jack game. And I said, we're your real fans. He said, oh, they all say that. And I started naming off his teammates. And he said, oh, I want to talk to these people. So he says, that was the biggest thrill of my life. He said, I went on the Today Show the next day. And I said, that wasn't your biggest thrill. I said, 1936, you hit 388, and you still hold the record for the highest batting average of a shortstop. He says, you're right, you're right. He said, this was a flash in the pan, that was big. So Luke Appling was a wonderful guy. Ernie Banks was threatened. Ernie Banks was very similar to Hank Aaron. They did not hit majestic home runs. They hit line shots. They both had very strong wrists. And when Ernie Banks hit a home run, it was just a line shot into the left field stands. But he was threatened. There was in St. Louis, I believe it was, and the FBI caught the culprit. But he had death threats for one reason or another. Yogi Berra, Paul Richards said, You never want to pitch to Yogi Berra after the 7th inning in a tight game. He'll beat you every time. And it was so true. Yogi Berra was a bad ball hitter, but he played 14 World Series. And like I say, he could really make you sick if you were on the other team. Lou Boudreau. Nobody talks about Lou Boudreau. Probably one of the most innovative managers ever. He invented the shift. He invented the pickoff play. He was an MVP. He was a manager at 24, won the pennant. Nobody talks about him. He ended up as a broadcaster for the Chicago Cubs. Clemente, we could have a whole session on Clemente. But the one thing I hear from all my Pittsburgh fans that come in, they were there when Clemente threw a ball from the wall to home plate on one bounce. He did everything. He was like the perfect player. He did everything perfect. As you know, he died on a mercy mission on Christmas week, and he had just hit his 3,000th hit. So Clemente, he was something else. DiMaggio, Berra said, DiMaggio, I only played with him for 3 years. He never made a mistake. He was perfect and everything. Here's a trivial thing. DiMaggio had 373 home runs, and he only struck out 391 times. So he struck out as many times as he hit home runs. You don't find that. Here's my favorite, Nellie Fox, little guy. Why is he on the list? Ted Williams said, by hook or crook, I'm going to get him in the Hall of Fame. Why? He is a professional hitter. How do you know he's a professional hitter? He struck out 218 times, at bat 9,200. He's the third least strikeout in the history of baseball. Nellie Fox led the White Sox, the 59 White Sox, to the pennant. Al Kaline, no minor league experience, won the batting title at age 21. Killebrew, here's an interesting story. I went to a convention, and all these people are in the convention, and I see this stocky, muscular man standing in the middle aisle, just looking around. I walked up to him and I said, excuse me, are you Harmon Killebrew? He says, I have been all my life. And so I said, well, I introduced myself. He turned it around and interviewed me. He didn't want to be interviewed. He says, what's your connection to baseball? I said, well, I played a little semi-pro, and I played in Panama a couple of years. And he said, tell me, did you ever hit a home run? I said, yeah. He says, how did it feel? I said, I felt nothing. He says, 571 times I didn't either. He says, when you hit it right, you hit it. But 2 home runs were in 40-degree temperature, and he says, I broke my hands. So, but it was so interesting. He interviewed me. So, anyway, you had Kiner and Killebrew, the home run or nothing. They both hit in the 250s, but Kiner, as you know, I think was the home run king 7 years in a row. I told you about Mantle and Stengel. Mantle could command a full session also. Matthews, this is interesting. I was mentioning this to a Boston Brave fan. Paul Wainer said, Matthews, don't touch him. He has a perfect swing. And so he consulted, when he came down to Atlanta, he consulted with Ty Cobb, and Ty Cobb said the same. He said, leave him alone. He had the perfect baseball swing. Mays, the catch. If you talk to Willie Mays, the catch was not special. He said the throw was special. He said, I've made catches much better than that throughout my career. But he says, I had the wherewithal to spin and throw a strike to second base to hold that runner. Mays is another time. 47 times he was the leader in the league. Musial, Stan the Man. Does anybody know why they called him Stan the Man? This guy knows a lot. Stan the Man, they say, oh, Stan the Man, because he never got thrown out, never argued. He was the man. Had nothing to do with it. When he went to Brooklyn, he murdered the Brooklyn Dodgers in Ebbets Field. He hit over 450. And when he came up to bat, they would chant. As you know, the Dodger fans were wild. They would chant, here comes that man again, here comes that man again. And it stuck. It was Stan the Man. Stan the Man was a friend of ours. We sent him 24 teddy bears to sign. There's a picture of him signing them up there. Incidentally, at break, we're going to have a little break. Feel free to come up here and see some very, very historic pictures. You're going to see the Mad Dash. You're going to see the drop third strike. You're going to see the shot heard around the world. So Stan Musial, at one time held 59 records. Newhouser, I mentioned 2 MVPs in a row. Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige was said to have won 22,000 games. He's the only pitcher in the Hall of Fame with a losing record. But get this, his first game against the White Sox, 51,000 people came. He pitched a 1-0 shutout. 7 days later, he pitched a 2-0 shutout in front of 69,000 in Cleveland. Satchel Paige was something else. Bob Feller loved Satchel Paige. They went on a barnstorming trip together. And when the hotel said, we don't take blacks in our hotel, Bob Feller said, you don't take us either. And they slept in buses many nights because on the barnstorming trip, they wouldn't accept Satchel Paige's Negro team. So that's the way it was in 1950. Snyder, Duke Snyder, he was the only lefty in the lineup for the Dodgers for years. He hit 40 home runs 5 years in a row. Everybody says Sandy Koufax, greatest lefty ever. Not by a long shot. Warren Spahn won 363 games. He had 363 hits. He didn't win his first game until he was 25 years old. He pitched a no-hitter at 39. He pitched a no-hitter at 40. 363 games. He had 121 shutouts. Now, put that against Sandy Koufax. Great pitcher for 5 years, but you can't beat Warren Spahn. Spawny's picture's up there too. Spahn and Sain's picture's up there in Pray for Rain. Ted Williams, I can't take all the time for Ted Williams. Ted Williams is a story in itself. I can tell you from personal, we were one of his dealers. Ted Williams was much misunderstood. Quickly, his mother was Mexican. The Boston people didn't take to that. And I have a book that I'm going to give out later on that tells the real story why the press took out after Ted Williams. Very, very interesting. And the dean of sports writers was a guy named Sullivan, and Ted Williams didn't kowtow to him, so he says, I'll fix you, Ted. So anyway, there's so much about Ted Williams. The perfect hitter. He had a chart with 16 squares on it. He could tell you which square, what percentage of hits he got. And he wouldn't try to hit to left field when they put the shift on. And as you all know, he hit 406 when on the last game by getting 6 hits and 8 times up. And he was just a consummate pro. Unfortunately, like Ernie Banks, he didn't get into many postseasons. Now we can have some trivia fun. Everybody likes trivia. I told you about Roger Craig, but Roger Craig would come into the shop and he says to Lori, you know, Lori, I pitched the last game in Ebbets Field. I pitched the first game for the New York Mets, but you only remember me for being the manager at the earthquake. And that was true. He was the manager during the Oakland and Giants World Series. So that was a bunch of trivia. And Roger Craig, had a terrible year one year. I think he won 5 and lost 26 or something like that. This is a great story. Stan Musial hit 5 home runs in a doubleheader. There was an 8-year-old kid in the stands, and this 8-year-old kid said to his daddy, "Daddy, someday I want to be a major leaguer." 17 years later, this man hit 5 home runs in one game. The only one to do it in a doubleheader. His name was Nate Colbert with the San Diego Padres. Ironic. He saw Musial do it, and he was the next one to do it. Great story. Floyd Gable. Anybody ever hear of Floyd Gable? No. Great story. When Lou and I had dinner with Bob Feller, Bob told us stories, and he said one of his big disappointments, the Cleveland Indians were playing the Detroit Tigers the last 3 games of the season for the title. If Cleveland won, they were going to go in. They knew, Del Baker with Detroit knew that they were going to pitch Feller, so they sacrificed a pitcher. They called up a guy named Floyd Gable to pitch the first game, knowing Feller was going to win. All Floyd Gable did was shut him out. And here's the ironic part. Bob Feller pitched a 2-hitter, and he says, "Jerry, Lou," he says, "I pitched a perfect game. The ball was low and outside to Rudy York. He hits a home run to the wrong field." And they lost 2-0. Floyd Gable never appeared in another major league game. That is real trivia. Bill Bevins. Everybody knows about the near no-hitter of Bill Bevins. Brooklyn Dodgers. This is ironic also. Bill Bevins pitching a no-hitter. Cookie Lavagetto comes up. No, before that, Gianfranco made a fantastic catch. Lavagetto hit a double and knocked Bill Bevins out. The irony of that story is Gianfranco, Lavagetto, and Bevins never played another major league game. And they were playing in the World Series. Here's one for you, all your Dodger guys. Pee Wee Reese played in every single Brooklyn Dodger World Series game. Only player, and there were several. Every single at bat, Pee Wee Reese played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Bobo Newsom, what a guy. He won 222 games and he lost 240. Only player to ever do that. Played for 15 teams. 5 times with the Washington Senators. Cal Griffith said, "You got a job?" "No." "Come on." 5 times. Charlie Maxwell, Sunday Charlie. Why'd they call him Sunday Charlie? He hit 146 home runs, 40 of them on Sunday. Most of them against the New York Yankees. This is really trivial. But they left the gloves on their field until 1954. You know, when they finished the inning, they just throw the glove up there. Well, when they changed that, there was one guy really happy, Phil Rizzuto, because one guy on the opposing team put a dead mouse in Rizzuto's glove. And when he went out there, he picked up his glove and he screamed. He made 2 errors the rest of the game. So they didn't leave the gloves out on the field. Pete Gray was hitting high average in the minor leagues, and they signed him. And when he appeared up in Montreal to his minor league assignment, he walked in with his coat over his shoulder, and the manager picked him up at the train, and he said, "Here, give me your coat." He gave him his coat. Pete Gray only had 1 arm. The manager fainted. He says, "Oh, well," he says, "he hit 320, I better give him a chance." And as you know, in 1944, he came with the Browns. He only hit 218, but the first time up he got a hit. but he learned how to play ball with one arm. So that's also trivia. All-time feats not discussed. This is away from the golden age, but there's so many things that happen in baseball. You know, baseball's great here. Cleveland, we just had the opening. Cleveland just won the first 3 games. They're picked to win again. Houston is going to be tough. They're winning. So, you know, you never know what to expect in baseball. Well, Babe Ruth, let's talk about the Boston Red Sox. Babe Ruth pitched the longest game in World Series history. He won 2-1. He pitched all 14 innings. 1918, he batted 6th as a pitcher, and he won. He had a .5 ERA in World Series pitching. 1919, his last year with the Red Sox, he pitched and he hit 29 home runs as a pitcher. As a starter, in one of the games, he didn't like the umpire's decision on the second pitch. So he went in and he decked him. He knocked him out. So naturally he was thrown out of the game. And a young guy by the name of Ernie Shore came in, pitched a perfect game. And when you see no hitters, you'll see an asterisk that he pitched a perfect game, but Ruth was the starter. Ruth won 94 games, lost 46, and he had an ERA of 2.28. He still ranks as the top pitcher with the Red Sox. And you know what he did as a hitter for, you know what he did? He did everything. He womanized, he drank, he did everything. But he never turned down a kid. There's stories where he stood outside of the park for 2 hours signing autographs for kids. A grown-up would come up to him, he'd push him aside, took care of the kids. He, as you know, he grew up in an industrial school in Baltimore, and he knew what it was like. So Babe Ruth, there's 27 books out on Babe Ruth. I've read most of them. I just loved the guy for what he was. He was bigger. He really fits that term, bigger than life. Joe Sewell. Joe Sewell was made famous because he never struck out. Joe Sewell was at bat 7,100 times. He struck out 114 times. The most I think he struck out was 9 in a year. He had a 312 batting average. He had a brother by the name of Luke Sewell that caught for the White Sox for a while that didn't make it. But Joe Sewell is another one that we don't talk about. But when you think about it today, Reggie Jackson struck out 2,800 times. So Joe Sewell was the consummate. Now this is interesting too. Ray Schalk. Ray Schalk and Eddie Collins were the 2 lily white players on the 1919 White Sox. They kept it from them. Ray Schalk was in the Hall of Fame not because of his hitting, because of his catching. He was the best catcher. He caught 4 no-hitters in those days, which was unheard of. He is the one that was the first to back up a first base when on a ground ball. He would run and back up the first baseman. He's the one that did it. On a personal note, Ray Schalk was my sponsor. When I was 11 years old, he sponsored my baseball team. And I have a picture. I forgot about it. When I moved, I found this panorama of the whole league. Ray Schalk was standing behind me with his hand on my shoulder. And that, you know, really gets you. But Ray Schalk opened up a bowling alley, and he was well known in Chicago, and he was lily white. He couldn't understand why the pitchers weren't throwing the pitch he was calling. And after the trial and everything, they lauded Eddie Collins and Ray Schalk. Now this is modern baseball, but it's worthy of, I have to tell it to you. Dick Stigman. I think there's a Twins fan here. Minnesota Twins fan?
Me. Yay, Minnesota.
Yeah. Dick Stigman was pitching a no-hitter in the 7th inning. Mickey Byrne was the manager of the Washington Senators. He sent up a green player, never hit before. Go on up there and break this open. So the kid goes up there, he hits a home run. His first time at bat in the big leagues, he hits a home run. He had the most famous name in the world at that time, John Kennedy. He was born on the same date as John Kennedy. They called him Prez. John Kennedy played for me on the south side of Chicago as a shortstop on my amateur team. John Kennedy, after 40 years, called me last Saturday and said, "Is this Jerry Glenn?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "It's John Kennedy." I almost fainted. And we had a long discussion. He says, "Next time I come to, yeah, I just learned you had a shop on Hilton Head because I was a good friend of Mike Hegan, who passed away and lives on the island." And he said, "Next time we come, we'll certainly get together." So that's a trivial story, but important in my life. John Kennedy's wife wheeled my daughter Lori, who's 60 now, around at the ball games. She would wheel her around in a buggy. So you know this was 60 years ago. I managed the Chicago Bears college team in south side of Chicago. We went to the Nationals 3 years in a row, and I was very proud of that, and especially of John Kennedy. Why don't we take a 7th inning stretch and take about 10 minutes, and please take a look at some of these fantastic pictures up here, and fill out your charts. And I have a pack of baseball cards I want each one of you to get. Very important. So let's take a 10-minute stretch.
Dick Grote, 2 Dick Grotes, Del Crandall, Johnny Padres.
Great third baseman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
First Dodgers World
Later
Series.
played
Yeah.
for the Yankees.
Feel pretty good. Padres again.
Oh, thank you.
Now, one of the best third basemen.
Oh, yes.
Except for.
Did you say there was a
Who was best? Played for his name was Billy Hood. Played for the Dodgers. Number 3.
I hope I haven't been rushing you because we're right on schedule. So also, if you want to rank what you feel are the 5 best, and at the end of the afternoon, I'll tell you who AP, Consensus, Sports Illustrated, everybody put their names into a hopper, counted everything from caught stealing to errors to walks to whatever, and I'll tell you who the 5 best are in rank order. And let's see if anybody does also. Well, thank you. How about that? I write columns for the Bluffton Sun once a month. And a month ago, I wrote a column about Bob Feller. And the title was, "He was really a great feller." And I want to tell you this story because you may not have read it. But we had Bob Feller here in 1999, and as I told you, 500 and some people were on the block on Main Street to meet Bob. Bob took time with everybody. And there was a very touching story. two stories that I want to relate because we have a little time. The first one was a lady came up to me from Sun City and said, we used to live in Gates Mills, and we moved down here and my husband had a stroke. And he's out in the car. Do you think that Bob would come out and say hello to him? And I said, let me see. So I walked up to the table where I was greeting people at the door, and then Lou Perella was handling the people at the desk. And I said, Bob, there's one of your former neighbors out, and he can't get out of the car. Could you? And he just jumped up, and he was very boisterous. Folks, just a minute, I've got something important to do. He went out, and he spoke to this gentleman for 5 or 10 minutes, came back, the wife came in just sobbing. She said, you don't know what that meant to him. That's the kind of guy he was. So now we have a line coming, streaming through the shop, and a guy meets me at the door and he says, I served under Bob on the USS Alabama. And he said, he won't remember me, but he says, he was my commanding officer. So halfway down the line, Bob's signing the autographs like this. He looks up, Jim! 40 years. He recognized this man. Come up here. And he says, here's the hero. And he made over him to such a thing. And it was, you can't believe it. A lot of these old players want to talk to you if you know what you're talking about. If you're just trivial, they don't want to get involved. And I heard this from, I was surprised, somebody told me that there was a player he didn't have a good experience with. I had one of my best experiences with him. So they have their days. But it's fun to talk to these old timers. Example, I just read a book by Ned Garver. And Ned Garver played for the St. Louis Browns and Detroit Tigers. He won 20 games for a team that only won 50. The St. Louis Browns, okay? I asked Lori, find out if Ned is still living. So she did, yes. So I called Bryan, Ohio Information, got his number, called him. His wife answers and says, Ned's not here, he's in dialysis. Please call him. He's 91. Please call him, he'll love to hear from you. So when I called him, I couldn't get him off the phone. He wanted to talk about everything. So I says, Ned, do you have any more of your books? Yeah, he says, I have 10. I says, send them to me and I'll send you a check. And I said, would you sign one? He says, oh no. He says, I'll sign them all. So he did. Ned Garver just passed away a month ago. But he wanted to talk. Why? I told him I played ball against the fellow that hit 20 homers the year he won 20 games. I played ball against him. He says, heck of a hitter, terrible fielder. So, I mean, we really got into it. My favorite story, and it relates to what's coming up. Lori and I have sold 400 copies of a book in our shop. It's got the greatest name for folks like you, Sleeper Cars and Flannel Uniforms. It was written by a man who was a quarterback for Kansas State and broke his collarbone. But he found he could throw underhand, and he became the first of the great submariners. His name was Eldon Auker. Eldon Auker wrote a book at age 90. He called me up and he says, Mr. Glenn, he says, I know your name because my publisher says you're selling a lot of my books. My alarm. It said 7th inning. He says, you're selling a lot of my books, how come? I says, Eldon, I'm sort of a historian. It's the best book I've ever read on baseball for insight. Oh, thank you. And I says, I agree with Ted Williams. Ted Williams said it. Bob Costas said it. Tommy Lasorda said it. It's a little book. It's called Sleeper Cars and Flannel Uniforms. So I call my publisher or his publisher, the other day. I says, how many do you have left? Just a minute. I have 15 hardcover, 15 softcover. I said, I'll take them home. So they're due in Tuesday. I only have like 3 in the shop. I'm not here to sell. I'm just here to advise. So anyway, it's a great book, but he wanted to talk. And he sent me this letter thanking me for the support. But Eldon Walker was a friend of President Kennedy. He played golf with Babe Ruth. He knew Ted Williams. It's all in the book. And there's one chapter in there. The ladies, if you read it carefully, it'll bring tears to your eyes. I won't tell you any more about it. And another little snippet, he will tell the story about the guy that stole something from Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth caught him, and that man was banned from the American League for life, and that man is in the Hall of Fame. Now, if that doesn't pique your interest, I've failed. So anyway, we have that book. Getting back to that Bob Feller story, I was thrown off for a minute. So Jim, come on up here. And so when Jim left, it was the same thing. He says, can you imagine this man, as busy as he is, and everything, remembered me? And that was in the article that I wrote. He was really a true American. As you know, he enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor. He was on his way to sign a contract, and he heard it on the radio coming from Van Meter, and he enlisted that next day. And he spent 4.5 years at the peak of his career. He would have won easily another 100 games. He won 368 games, or 363. But he would have easily won another 100 games. So, getting back to the books. Sweeper cars and flannel uniforms. Milton Berle. It's just a little book, but it's a page turner. The other book, you all need a smile on your face. And this yogi book, I have a standing order of 20 every week and sell out. This is the latest book. It has stories in here about Billy Crystal tells what he thinks, Tim McCarver, and if there are any golfers in here, one of the favorite ones I tell, 90% of the short putts don't go in. Or, Steve McQueen really looks good in this movie. He must have made it before he died. So, anyway, this is a gem. Honest to goodness, I had a guy come in, he was going to his room, he bought this. The next morning he came in and bought 6. He says, I have to give these out to my friends. He says, this is the most enjoyable book. But the star of the show is this book by Dick Perez, one of my closest friends. He's the Hall of Fame artist, the artist for the Philadelphia Phillies and Philadelphia Eagles. Every Hall of Famer is in this picture, 1,400 paintings. He makes, for us only, giclées, if you know what a giclée is, finest form of printing. If you buy the book and you like a painting, you can get anyone made into a giclée signed by Dick, and there's 2 examples. Rachel Robinson told me that's her favorite painting of her Jackie. That's just what she said. Dick Perez did my favorite painting of my Jackie. I met her at a show. And there is Father Stengel with Mickey. So anyway, this book is available. The hardcover is $150. The softcover is $49. And somebody that has a baseball card out there is going to win this tonight, and to this and this. So we'll close with that. But Dick Perez and his wife and Audrey and I went to Paris for 2 weeks. He took us through every museum, and folks, unless you're with an expert, you really don't know what art is. There is so much to art by all artists, the little innuendos that he could point out. It was the most amazing 2 weeks of our adult life. And Dick is a wonderful guy. He lives in Brooklyn, born in Brooklyn. He's Puerto Rican, and just a sweetheart of a guy. Really a great game. Now, in 100 years, only a few major changes have taken place. The DH. I don't know how you feel about it, but it made baseball into 2 separate games. I mean, really, 2 separate games. A manager of a National League has no bearing on the American League and vice versa. You know, pinch hitting and the pitcher hitting and all that. There's so much more strategy, in my opinion, to the non-DH. Video review. I'm a little disappointed in it, but I guess it's good. Especially, I think they use it too often. I think if it has a bearing on the outcome of the game in the last 2 innings, I think that's good. But there's so few rules changes, so it's been the same. Now let's consider today's players. Will we talk about them 65 years from now like we're talking about all these great guys that we're talking about now? You've got Jeter, Kershaw, Trout, Harper, Freeman, Rivera, A-Rod, McGuire, Goldschmidt, Bryant, Pujols, Beltre, and Miguel Cabrera, just to name a few. I think there's only 3 that are proven that we'll talk about. I think Jeter, wonderful player, wonderful person. Pujols came on the scene, fantastic player. And somebody not many people talk about, but I'll tell you what, I don't want to face Miguel Cabrera with the Detroit Tigers. He is a winner. All these other guys, you don't know what's going to happen. And what a shame about Sosa, McGuire, Clemens, Palmeiro. We don't know what is the jury going to finally say about them. We just don't know. It's a shame. You know, Rafael Palmeiro, gosh, he had figures nobody was paying attention to. We don't know whether it did it. Nobody knows. McGuire is another story. When McGuire did what he did, there was nothing talked about it. The commissioner didn't say a thing about it. All they saw was this Sosa McGuire circus, and it was a circus, and it was exciting, and I know that each one of you were following it every day. What happened? What happened? And they're both under suspect. It's really probably the sin of the last 20 years of what happened there. Now, why don't we open it up? Anybody like to make a comment? Speak up loud. Gentlemen, yes, sir.
One favorite name I haven't heard today, Cal Ripken.
Who?
Cal Ripken.
He's not from the 50s.
Well,
Yeah.
You're branching out a little bit.
Yeah, well, Cal Ripken, of course, I could also talk about Lou Gehrig. But Cal Ripken was, he's devoted his whole life. His father was manager, his brother was second baseman. He has now established a league in Aberdeen, Maryland, and just a wonderful guy. Pardon? I'm sorry.
He has a ballpark in Maryland.
Yes. Yeah, right off of 95. I think you can see it. So no, Cal Ripken's good. And I know, I only had 25 players. Gosh, there was a lot more. But those 25, you know what I missed? I missed the non-Hall of Famers. I get so wrapped up on things. that, how about, we talked about Branca, we talked about Larson, Gil Hodges. I think Gil Hodges is going to go in the Hall of Fame this year with the veterans. I met with his wife, and she goes to bed every night praying my Gilly makes the Hall of Fame. Now, he had a modest career, 370 homers, 2,100 hits, but he was a master of a manager that people really enjoyed. And so, Gil Hodges, when I see a lot of eyebrows jump up when I said Gil Hodges, because I think you feel the same, that Gil Hodges is, and then a minor leaguer, you ever hear of Steve Bilko? Steve Bilko hit home runs like every day on the Pacific Coast. The major leaguers kept trying to pick up Steve Bilko. And he went to the Cubs, he went to the Cardinals, he went to Detroit, he went to Cincinnati. He couldn't cut it. But he went back out to the Pacific Coast. He hit 370 homers as a minor leaguer, and he says, "Leave me alone. I like it out in Hollywood." And so Steve Bilko was the butt end of a lot of jokes on TV with these Hollywood people, and people would come from all over to see big Steve Bilko, but he couldn't hit in the major leagues. He didn't want to. He wanted to stay on the West Coast. So that's a non-major leaguer, non-Hall of Famer that people still talk about. It's amazing in the shop, and that's why people come in and reminisce. That's a good name for a shop, you know? Yeah. But they come in and reminisce about their favorite players, and I love to talk about it. And I invite you folks, come over. You don't have to buy anything. Just talk, and it keeps me going. I've got 15 to go. So you're welcome to come at any time. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Who's the other four beside Hodges that you feel should be Hall of Fame close? Yeah, Denise Hodges
And Branca and Larson. Well, we talk about him. I'm saying, no, terrible. But I'm saying these are unforgettables. These are not. Yeah, they're people that we talk about, and I got that list somewhere here. Here we go. Okay, Ned Garber was another one. Pitched with terrible teams, and on Ned Garber, he wanted to talk. He says, "Jerry," he says, he says, "I pitched the first game of the doubleheader that Eddie Goodell led off the second game." You know who Eddie Goodell was? The midget. Bill Beck employed the midget. Well, he pitched the first game. He also pitched the game that Bill Beck turned over the managers to the crowd by giving them a placard, bunt, walk, whatever. And he pitched that game. So that was Ned Garber's story. These guys, honest to goodness, they want to talk if you know what you're talking about. Here's another one. Virgil Trucks. If you're a Detroit, a White Sox, you talk about Virgil Trucks. Why? His name was Fire Trucks because he threw the ball through the wall. But Virgil Trucks won 177 games. But get this, one year, 1952, he won 5 games and lost 19. 2 of the 5 games he won were no-hitters. Now, how's that? And they were almost in a row. And you know who pitched 2 in a row? Johnny Vandermeer. Johnny Vandermeer, I met with him 1991. He says, Jerry, I'll tell you what, nobody's going to beat my record. They'll tie it, they may tie it, somebody may get two. No one's ever going to get three in a row. So he was so right. And Johnny Vandermeer was a good pitcher. He pitched the second no-hitter was the first night game at Ebbets Field. So that was historic in itself. So that's so we had Trucks, Garver, Hodges, Branca, Larson, and Bilko. And there's so many more, but these are unforgettables. Yes, sir. Ewell Blackwell, the whip. He ended up with the Yankees, and he was scary. He was like 6'5". He threw sidearm, and from the left side, and the batters almost went crazy trying to hit him. Ewell Blackwell. This is the dean of sport writers here. This guy is really into it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
One comment, you mentioned the minor leagues. I read a fascinating book last year called Where No One Knows Your Name. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the author, but I think it was a New York Times sports writer. But it's a wonderful book about the minor leagues.
I heard about that.
It's published in the last year
Yeah.
and a half.
Yeah. You know, the name Sweeper Cars and Flannel Uniforms is so wonderful. If you think about it, the players had to get on a train and go from city to city, and they had to wear those ungodly uniforms that had to be, and there was no air conditioning. And so baseball was really baseball in this era that we're talking about. Yes, sir.
What kind of money did the best players make from 1940 to 1960?
Well, here's a story. Joe DiMaggio was going to threaten a walkout if he didn't get $45,000. And so he went to Weiss, and Weiss said, "What do you mean? Gehrig only gets 41. He says, "He's underpaid. Gehrig's underpaid." He got his 45,000. But, and you all know the story about Babe Ruth. He wanted 80,000, and he said, "My God, you'd be making more than the president." He said, "I had a better year."
Yeah.
So, but we're talking in generalities, $6,000. $6,000. $2.75 meal money in those days. Yes, sir.
And did they have to have a second job, most of them?
Oh, all of them. That's why after the season, you had a lot of people being insurance men. Bob Feller was an insurance man. Selling cars, because you had a notable name. Tony Pyatt, first baseman for the White Sox in the late 30s and early 40s. He had a very successful auto agency, and everybody went to Tony Pyatt because it's Tony Pyatt. He played for the White Sox. And the White Sox, as miserable as they are, my team, they had a good following. Comiskey Park was really something. A kid I played with made the White Sox, played third base in the '59 World Series. His name was Sammy Esposito. And Sammy is the exact same age as I am. He's suffering terribly with Alzheimer's in a home. And I send him letters, and his nurse says, "I read them when Sammy has an in day." And his smiles comes to his face, so that's the one little thing I can do. Sammy's still living. So, yes, sir.
Didn't Joe DiMaggio make 100,000 one year?
Who?
Joe DiMaggio.
Yeah, his last year, or no, his second to the last year. The first $100,000 man, I believe, was Hank Greenberg. So there was a question back there. Yes, ma'am.
I remember that after Larson pitched the perfect game, New York Post had a headline that said, "Dodgers victim of Larson." And I thought that was really clever headline.
I'm sorry, I'm hard of hearing.
The Dodgers were a victim of larceny. After the
Dodgers what?
Victim of larceny.
Yeah, but, you know, oh, something else about Don Larson, trivial, but he's the guy that started the no windup. He's the pitcher that started the no windup. See, I have all this worthless information in here. Yeah. But it's been an awful lot of fun, and now do you want to know who the top 5 are?
Yeah.
There's always an argument when it comes to rankings. But I had to take this to heart because it was a consensus of Bill James, as you all know, is the master statistician. Number 5, this might be a surprise to you, is Stan Musial. Number 4, Hannes Wagner. Number 3, Willie Mays. Number 2, Ty Cobb. Number 1, Babe Ruth. Anybody hit it? And if you see, you have to consider everything. Ted Williams was not the greatest fielder. I thought that Hank Aaron should have been in there, but Stan Musial did just everything, and that's why he got 5. Yes, sir.
Why is Walter Johnson on the list and not Cy Young?
Well, you know what? Here's the problem with pitchers, and it's the same in baseball cards. Honest to goodness, hitters sell. Pitchers don't. The best baseball card of a pitcher is Nolan Ryan. But you can have Greg Maddox cards go for $8. Mickey Mantle's go for millions. Mickey Mantle rookie just went for $1.2 million. So, Walter Johnson, greatest right-hander ever, hands down. Christy Mathewson, right up there. When you get into the old timers, it's pretty hard. It's apples and oranges. Yes, sir.
When people evaluate the old timers that they never saw play, do they do it strictly by statistics?
Yes, yes. And hand down words that are reliable. You know, here you have Jim Hegan, not much of a hitter, great catcher. His son came along, and so he can pass on exactly. So, I mean, those are reliable sources. But, you know, it's amazing. 4 million people saw Bobby Thompson hit that home run. They were there. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Where do you put Pete Rose?
In my opinion, Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame, but banned from professional baseball in this respect. He earned his way, he paid his debt, but the rules are no betting. So he shouldn't be a coach, a manager, a scout, but he should be in the Hall of Fame. That's my opinion, and a lot of Cincinnati people come in feel the same way. Bob Feller hated him. He says, if he ever gets in, it'll be over my grave. So that's, you know, there's a sign in every no betting, and he did bet, and he admitted to it. But 4,292, you know, a great player, great hustler.
He bet on his own team.
That is in dispute.
Yes.
Yeah. But,
Bonds and Clemens in the Hall of Fame?
okay. It's 12:30, right on the deck. Who has a Mickey Mantle card? Appropriate, sir. Yeah, you just keep it. Who has a Hank Aaron card? Okay.
I got it back here.
You have a Hank Aaron card?
Yeah, I do.
Now the big one. Who has a Stan Musial card? You have it?
Wow.
Well, you get the full enchilada. Yeah, you're gonna really enjoy that book. Especially when you find out who Babe Ruth caught. You got it. You're gonna love it. Yeah. Yeah.